Welcome to the third edition of the DigitalEDU Dialogues Podcast, a go-to source for administrators, educators, and students to discover all the latest education trends, emerging educational technology, and to learn directly from our experts who are on the front lines every single day. I'm your host, Flip Livingstone, marketing and content specialist for Educity. Thank you so much for joining us for a very special episode featuring a deep dive into one of the hottest topics in education, and that's artificial intelligence. Thank you so much for joining us once again for the DigitalEDU Dialogues Podcast. And on today's episode, we are taking a look at the fastest growing trend in the education industry. That's AI. Let's be honest, AI is everywhere. It's the fastest growing trend on the tips of the lips of experts across almost every industry that matters. We've heard a lot about AI, and by now, a lot of us out there are really starting to understand the basics of what AI can do, with apps such as Ask AI, Microsoft's Bing Chat, and of course, ChatGPT. But what about AI at the higher education level? The landscape of learning is obviously at a tipping point. How can educators use AI as a tool for course design? Can AI help fight the massive enrollment decline across North American campuses? What does the future AI hold at the higher education level? Of course, there'll always be more questions than answers. But on today's brand new episode, we are going to try and answer some of these AI-related queries that matter most to administrators, teachers, and of course, students. Joining me on today's episode are two experts of the digital learning space who are on those front lines that I already mentioned, working every single day with AI and how it affects higher education. Bettyjo Bouchey, Vice Provost of Digital Strategy and Operations at National Louis University, and Ellis Reeves, Director of Online Learning and Support at the University of South Carolina Aiken, will be on joining me today for what should be yet another very interesting conversation on the DigitalEDU Dialogues Podcast. And up first, Bettyjo Bouchey. And joining us now, our first guest on the third episode of the DigitalEDU Dialogues Podcast, Bettyjo Bouchey, Vice Provost, Digital Strategy and Operation at National Louis University. Really excited to have you on today, Bettyjo. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Goodness, absolutely my pleasure, Flip. Thank you.
No problem. I've done some research on what you're up to, what you like to do professionally. I know you're a strategist, speaker, author, moderator. You do a little bit of everything, but why don't you just quickly explain for our listeners who you are and what you do on a daily basis?
Sure. So thank you for that brief introduction. One of the things that I like to say about my role and my team's role at National Louis University is that we are in the business of winning hearts and minds as it relates to online and digital education, as well as hybridized formats and the support of online and hybrid students. So that can take many different shapes depending on the day.
Of course. Yeah, it's one of those things that the landscape in education, I say it every week, is evolving so rapidly. And I think that's one of the reasons it's important to talk to people like you who are on the front lines every single day dealing with this transition or, shifting landscape. So AI is what we're talking about today. It's what everyone's talking about right now in education, especially, but I think basically in every major industry, AI is having an impact. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it. And maybe you could tell our listeners a few ways that AI is being, used, integrated into higher education. And we hear a lot about the pitfalls, the downsides, but what are the benefits that are really AI is offering for educators, universities and that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, I think the word integrated might be a strong word at this point. I think we're
Okay.
still many of us are still in this emerging and discovery phase around artificial intelligence and machine learning and how that might fit into this post-secondary landscape. And I think that depending on the day and who you're talking to, the range of
Right.
emotions, or feelings are curiosity to anxiety. And I think that's all really necessary, right? I think any fairly large disruption really should have that spectrum of understanding and feelings. And part of that is meant to really prompt us to think really deeply about where does it fit? Where could we use it for good? That's where I prefer to keep the conversation is certainly we do have some concerns around plagiarism and cheating, as we always will in higher ed. And I think the bigger conversation is how can we use particularly machine learning and supervised machine learning in offsetting or offloading, if you will, some of the mundane tasks that we often spend a lot of human time on in higher ed that would then really free up those humans to offer this more precise, more surgical teaching, learning, and support of our students that potentially we couldn't provide otherwise, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And I think what's interesting that you mentioned there at the end is supporting students. A lot is being said about what AI can do, and it is important, obviously, the side of freeing up time for professors, helping administrators with, enrollment and things like that. But I want to also talk about the impact on students that you touched on and supporting students. What ways can maybe actually AI help with student retention? And I know that's a big challenge that a lot of colleges across North America are facing right now. How could that really help higher education, and what strategies maybe can institutions implement to leverage AI effectively? And I know that's a tough question for you.
It's a big question. And, a couple of things that come to mind for me, are around learning analytics. If we think about, what can the human mind really attend to right now? That's a fairly limited data set that we can really ingest and do something about. Whereas artificial intelligence could be looking at 1,000 data points, tens of thousands of data points about one student, helping us to identify, what we might perceive as at risk, or perhaps, a set of, behaviors that we want to create, proactive services to mitigate for, right? Especially if you think about pre-enrollment factors that we really don't have a lot of access to, right? We'll take in kind of a minimal, amount of pre-enrollment information, particularly in the financial aid, space for sure. But outside of that, we really don't know a lot about our students. But my goodness, they're on the internet. They're living in the world for at least 18 years prior to them getting to us. There's a lot that AI could help us understand about those students as they're coming to us in terms of what they actually need. I think one of the things that is both unique, interesting, and also perhaps problematic in higher ed is that we spend a lot of time making assumptions about what our students need. Based on our experiences, perhaps, whether working at our institutions or being previous students ourselves. But, many of us, myself included, it's been a minute since we were, in college, and the needs of our learners have really changed. And it's really difficult for us to understand that, right? And really live in that student's footprint. So AI could be a really nice way to looking at this huge, sort of data footprint that a student has been amassing in their lives, telling us more about how to help them learn, how to support them better. So that's just a whole new landscape. The other piece I tend to think about is, AI could really be helping us solve some wicked problems that we have been spending a lot of time trying to figure out, right? So how do we really retain students? Do we have to be committed to this model where if a student leaves us, it's a failure? Are there other ways that we can create tuition models or sort of work with Title IV in a different way where these things aren't perceived in that way or aren't counted in that way even? So, there are many ways that we could be using AI to say, tell us what the future of this looks like. Give us some new ideas that we don't have in our brains because of our constructs that we've been working under.
What really hit home for me with what you just said there is, you mentioned students are at least 18, and then after that, there's not a ton of information that you always get pre-enrollment wise. Today's student is changing. The demographic of learners is much different. A lot of people are maybe in their late 20s now, early 30s, looking to upskill, working a job, perhaps a full-time, maybe a couple of part-times, and trying to put themselves through school as well. So that's one of those interesting factors that I think you're spot on with, AI really helping you understand who it is that you're trying to support through this journey of higher education. So that one really hits home for me. And my other question for you here, before we quickly get to a break, I will be back right after that to pick Bettyjo's brain a couple more times, including on the future of AI. But one more on students. I've learned a lot over the last week or so about how students are really starting to use, we know all about Chat GPT, but there are so many others out there, Bing Chat, using them in new ways, even as their Google, finding resources, videos, etc. What are your thoughts on that growing trend of students really starting to rely and use AI as legitimate tools for research and, doing what they do day to day?
Sure. So, most of us knew this was coming, hopefully, right? And are getting more and more comfortable with it. Is sort of a Chat GPT the new Google? Probably in some ways, right?
Yeah.
I think what I find interesting about it, and perhaps even more compelling, is to take the position that not only should we be embracing the integration of AI, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, but really thinking about our duty to our learners to show them how to ethically and responsibly use AI in their careers upon graduation. These students will be leaving and entering workforces where that will probably be an expectation. And it is really our responsibility to prepare them for that, to not let them be surprised by that. So I think it's critically important to, be experimenting with the use of AI in our classrooms, but then also taking a step back and looking at our curricula to say, where would AI fit in this, horizon of a program? Where are the use cases that we need to be talking about with these students as well?
Great points. This is why we have Bettyjo Bouchey on as a guest on today's episode. Right after the break, 2 more questions for her. One of them on the future of AI. What does the landscape hold for higher education? We will be right back after a quick message from the BAB Group.
This episode of DigitalEDU Dialogues is brought to you by the BAB Group. The demands for teaching and online learning are constantly evolving. Don't get left behind. Carve out a competitive edge and give students engaging learning experiences with support from the BAB Group's team of course design experts. As experienced online faculty and instructional designers, the BAB Group knows how to craft those aha moments for students and meet outcomes for every modality, online, hybrid, and face-to-face, creating engaging, welcoming, and inclusive learning spaces for students of all ages and abilities has never been more important. Discover how the BAB Group can help you by visiting their website today.
We have to pay those bills, Bettyjo, so thank you for hanging with me through our short commercial break there. I want to get back to the educator side of this, and I only have 2 more questions, so I'll let you go. I know you have a lot on the go, so thank you once again for joining us. Educators, how can teachers, professors, really prepare themselves? You touched on this already, and you said integrate might be a strong word, but what's the best way that they can start to immerse these technologies through their teaching methods, and maybe what support should institutions provide in that regard?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I had an opportunity this summer as I was teaching. I usually teach at least once a year over this summer. And I did have the opportunity to really do what I would encourage many faculty to do, which is ask my students how they wanted to use AI in our course.
Awesome.
And, one, because I wanted them to have agency in it, but two, because I wanted to learn with them. And my hypothesis was that they might have some ideas that had not occurred to me yet. And of course they did. So, I think this is the first place to start, is really going to our students, our learners, saying, hey, look, this is a thing that is happening. And we know, we've seen a lot of research already that our students are out ahead of us and will probably maintain that leading position forever, perhaps.
Yep.
So tell me, what would you like to do with this? How would you like to use it? I think that, we can come up with a lot of use cases where AI can be incorporated into assignments and into learning activities already, right? At NLU in particular, we're also doing we're partnering with another institution that has a great course that they've designed about using AI in the classroom, designed as a community of practice, where our academic leaders will be taking this course and then having these community of practice events with their faculty, brainstorming how to use AI responsibly and ethically, and learning from each other. I tried this, or I had a student do this. What did you learn? Here's what I learned, right? Just like we would in many other, instances of any sort of when online was coming online, when we were seeing competency-based programs sort of pop up, is knowing that we can learn from each other, and knowing that this is an evolving, sort of landscape, that we'll sort of come up with a portfolio of use cases today, and that will all change by Sunday. And this open-mindedness and this ability to sort of continue to take in new information about this will be critical. We really need to stand in a place of readiness, for lack of better words.
No, for sure. Being nimble with this kind of thing, I think, is important for everyone involved. It's not going anywhere. This isn't a passing fad or a trend. AI is here to stay. And I think that's actually one of the things maybe we're not discussing, is it is going to be even more and more integrated, not even to just higher education, into our day-to-day lives. So I think the more that we can get out ahead of it on all levels that it's going to start to influence what we do day to day, that's going to be critical for everyone's kind of success, obviously, at the higher education level. Last one for you, Bettyjo. Looking ahead, and again, I know some of these questions are a little bit green and a little bit open-ended, but what do you see as the most exciting possibilities and potential challenges for the intersection of AI and higher education over the next couple of years? I said 2 years in the list I sent you. We can think bigger if you'd like, but the general question holds the same.
Sure. So I would go back to some of the commentary in the beginning around learning analytics in particular.
Right.
I think, if I were to think about sort of low-hanging fruit, AI and machine learning, supervised machine learning in particular, there's a lot that we can be doing with data in that space. We have several institutions, of which, I would count my own, where we already spend a lot of time in data-informed, instruction and support of our students. But again, AI can really sort of supercharge that approach in a way that we would not be able to do just with humans alone. But if I also kind of take into account the growing price sensitivity and commoditization of higher ed, and competition from sort of outside of higher ed in terms of, the preparation of the next workforce. Higher ed is really challenged with, how do we do what we do today, faster, cheaper, more efficiently, all of the things, that the sort of like the industrial revolution for higher ed, right? Where technology and artificial intelligence potentially can help us do that, really optimize our operations, our operational frameworks, so that potentially, as we were to scale, perhaps we would need less humans. It sounds terrible to say that. My hope is that we're not, my hope is that we're not saying, gosh, we're going to lay off because we're using AI, but we're going to scale up and do that more efficiently. So.
No, I hear you. And it's one of those things that I think maybe you mentioned right off the top of our conversation is you try and look at the positive sides. You try and take the good that we can do with this. And the layoff thing is a real concern on the issue side. We don't need to go there on today's episode. Bettyjo, thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you check out Bettyjo on Twitter at Dr. Bouchey on Twitter. And of course, is it drbouchey.com as well?
Yes.
drbouchey.com. Make sure you check her out. And I hope you can join us sometime again soon. Right after the break, I have Ellis Reeves, Director of Online Learning and Support at the University of South Carolina Aiken, joining us as our second guest. Bettyjo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Flip. Take care.
And joining us now, our second guest on the third episode of the DigitalEDU Dialogues Podcast, Ellis Reeves, Director of Online Learning and Support at the University of South Carolina Aiken. Excited to have you on, Ellis, to talk about, of course, what everyone's talking about right now, AI in higher education.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I love podcasts, and I was so excited to get to talk about one of my favorite things, which is AI. So great, very glad to be here.
Perfect combination. And just before we get into the questions, Ellis, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do every day, and just a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I am the Director of Online Learning and Support at USC Aiken, and there I manage all of our online undergraduate programs. I assist our faculty with course development. I maintain accessibility across our courses, and I do research and trends in higher education, such as generative AI and how to improve those in our classrooms and in our course development process.
Well, that's actually really good to know, because hopefully if today goes well, you'll want to come back and I might have to pick your brain on the accessibility front as well, because obviously that's a big topic as well.
It is. And it's an amazing thing that we're drawing more focus towards accessibility too.
Well, there you go. You're in the notepad for later in the year for sure, Ellis. So let's kick it off. A lot of the conversation surrounding AI in learning in classroom settings seems to sometimes focus on the negatives. Mm-hmm. While obviously those are warranted and we should recognize them, what are some of the major benefits that you see, at least, of implementing AI, both to support students, but also to support administrators and educators?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first, like you said, the negatives and drawbacks are a large part of the conversation, and they're usually the loudest voices. But in my experience, those people have those feelings out of previous notions of AI, or because they don't have a great understanding with what's going on with generative AI.
Right.
Once you play around with the systems and get hands-on experience with generative AI, it's not near as scary as most people think it is. And the benefits, while like some of these negative comments and drawbacks are warranted, like you said, the benefits of using generative AI and meeting our students with what they're using is outstanding. You can do so much with using generative AI that could not be done before or took a decent amount of time before.
Right.
So in the course development side, we can develop courses, high quality courses, much quicker than we could previously. We can reach our students where they are much more quickly now.
Right.
We are able to do things and expand what is higher education because of this new technology. So I think the more people play around with it and get hands-on experience with it, we'll start to hear more and more benefits and less of those negatives and the drawbacks.
I think you're spot on correct. And actually, I think that potential to really help free up time for administrators and for professors and teachers at a bunch of different levels. Obviously, we're focusing on higher education right now, but I think that's what needs to be focused on. And that's what I want to ask you about next. AI does have that potential to really automate some certain processes for administrative tasks, grading, scheduling, maybe even intake on pre-enrollment. How can this automation benefit educators? And maybe what are some of the potential drawbacks associated with that? I know I'm putting you on the hot seat early, but I appreciate it, Ellis.
Oh, no, I love these questions. So some of the drawbacks, of course, whenever we're talking about technology, especially with artificial intelligence, you're going to lose some of that human connection. So being able to talk to somebody is lost sometimes when we're using artificial intelligence or other forms of technology, because that face-to-face or person-to-person interpersonal communication
Right.
is not with a real human. So while scheduling and things like that are so much easier now using AI, you will have some people lose that personal connection and have a longing for that. So that's a
Right.
drawback I see, especially as we make these systems more frequently used in higher education and in education in general.
Yeah,
That
most
being
definitely.
said, grading, if you can have AI do an initial review of your grading criteria and give you a sample score, it saves you so much time. If you have your students utilize some kind of AI system to check their grammar, clarity, especially in upper level courses, you're going to see a higher quality of thought and a higher comprehension of what the students are learning than you would before, because they're going to be able to articulate it better. So while there might be some of those drawbacks, if we really do a deep dive into the benefits of using AI in the classroom, I think we'll see that it's going to outweigh any of the negatives we could even think of.
I truly and wholeheartedly agree. I think we're also in this weird feeling out process where you mentioned people's apprehensive to it. We're humans. We don't really like new things that we don't understand. That tends to get people's backs up. But I think we're starting to break down some of those barriers that you mentioned. You also touched on course development. Obviously, having you on here, I got to ask you about it. Based on your experience, what do you think about AI in terms of using it for course development? You touched on it a little bit, but do you think more educators and administrators should be utilizing this for content creation? I know generating rubrics, those kinds of things can eat up a lot of time. I have a friend of ours, coworker, she's starting to use AI to support her in these kinds of tasks. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. I think more educators should be using AI, especially with many of the platform companies, the learning management systems, incorporating it into their systems.
Great point.
Anthology just recently did a release with their September release for Blackboard that incorporates AI into their system. So you can have modules generated based on AI. You enter the criteria, how complex you want it to be, and it will generate images, the module layout, and a short description. So it's going to save you a lot of time if you start using these systems, because some of the tedious tasks, I say tedious because most people don't enjoy doing them,
True.
are a lot quicker. So some people don't think about course design. They just want to teach what they know. AI will help to make sure that there's a more consistent course design and that students are having a more streamlined experience. So a streamlined and consistent experience.
That actually, sorry, please continue.
No, I think that's the biggest takeaway for me is if we can make it easier on not only our instructors, but our students, and make sure they're having a good, consistent experience, then that's a huge benefit of using AI. Rubrics, like you said, nobody enjoys making a rubrics, especially depending on how advanced your criteria is.
Yep.
With generative AI, you can input your assignment, say some of the things you're looking for, and then have it automatically generate a full rubric for you. We've been using it for my division for about 6 months, and rubric generation, people enjoy it now because it's a very easy, quick process.
There you go. There you go. Actually, that's a really interesting point that you just alluded to, is allowing teachers the time, sure, freeing up time, that's important, but also enabling them to really get more out of their jobs by maybe eliminating some of these more mundane tasks that really did eat up a lot of your energy that you're not able to then go out and best support your students. I spoke to Bettyjo Bouchey earlier on today's episode, National Louis University, and she mentioned one of the best parts about AI is being able to enable the staff to better support students, which I think is exactly what you're getting at.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can even use it for such simple tasks as emails. So say you have an email that's very complex and you're not sure exactly how you want to answer it. Send it through generative AI to get some sample verbiage, see what you can use. And so you meet your students with professionalism. If you need it to be sympathetic, though, AI can help you with that. So we could start using this tool to make sure we're not having to use as much of our time on some of the smaller tasks, but we are putting the best foot forward and really, really focusing on our students. And that's what this will free up a lot of faculty and staff to do.
Absolutely love it. We're going to continue to put our best foot forward on the third episode of the Digital EDU Dialogues podcast with Ellis Reeves of the University of South Carolina Aiken right after this short break.
Today's episode is brought to you by Professor Services. Looking for a job in teaching? Need to expand your network? Want to boost your income? Whatever it is, the expert team at Professor Services has you covered. From helping higher ed faculty find new jobs, to essential tools such as cover letters and CVs, to applying to jobs for you, Professor Services equips you to nail your job search. Don't stress over the job hunt. Maximize your potential and crush your next opportunity with support from our team of experienced administrators, mentors, and educators. Discover how the team at Professor Services can help. Visit professorservices.com today to get started and kickstart your career in higher education.
We are back with Ellis, Director of Online Learning and Support at the University of South Carolina Aiken. A couple more questions for you, Ellis. I really appreciate you taking the time. I actually hope that a lot of students and educators are out there listening to this conversation today, because I'm even already feeling more at ease about using AI in just what I do as a content creator. So I appreciate the conversation today. Thank you so much.
Oh,
A couple more
absolutely.
questions here for you. Maybe you could share some examples of some innovative AI-driven tools, platforms, anything out there that you might see faculty using, you might be using yourself, that are successfully improving teaching and learning outcomes in what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. So I actually just acquired a new system for our institution, and it's an AI learning system called Packback. And
Cool.
what this does is it has deep dive assignments where students write in a Word document in the learning management system with AI supporting them as a teaching assistant or tutor, kind of making sure they're using correct grammar, making
Amazing.
sure that they're staying on topic, making sure that they're meeting all of the guidelines established, and making sure that they're not plagiarizing or using any kind of generative AI in their writing.
Love that.
So, yes, it's an amazing system. It also
amazing.
does discussion board posts where it guides the students through discussion boards. Are they using open-ended questions? Are they making sure that they are actually getting what they need out of the discussions?
Wow.
Because oftentimes when we develop discussion boards, we have the criteria for it, but we don't guide students on how to do an open-ended question. And this system kind of helps with that to make sure the conversation keeps going. So it also has an AI grading assistant for faculty where
There you
they
go.
enter their criteria. The AI reviews that criteria and gives a sample score of what they would recommend the grade be. Now, faculty have to still have some involvement in this and review everything and make
Correct.
sure, but it does drastically reduce the grading time. So that's one of the systems I was very, very excited to look at. ChatGPT, also free if you're using GPT-3. Phenomenal system that you can just talk with. It will improve. You can have it, if you need it to generate a rubric, you can put the criteria in there and then just keep talking with it to have it improve. If you haven't played around with ChatGPT, please, 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 please play around with it, because it's fun, it's exciting, it's new, and it's very much similar to when the internet launched. It's a new evolution for technology. So get a part of it.
So agree. I've actually even started experimenting with Bing Chat. There is so much out there, and I think that might be the main point to this whole conversation. Is this does feel a lot like when search engines were starting to be really relied upon, and people were realizing how effective it can be in your day-to-day, not just jobs, but your day-to-day life. And I think that's what people are starting to understand about AI. And maybe there's been too many movies, and I see more of them on the horizon right now about AI ending our world.
Yep.
So maybe that's where some of the apprehensiveness comes from the general public. They've seen too many Will Smith movies, but I really appreciate the angle that you're taking here, really trying to take away the scary narrative, because like you said, start using it now, because it's not going anywhere.
Exactly. And if you look back at conversations in the 90s when the search engines really began to optimize and people were really using it, there are headlines you can read from the New York Times, anywhere, where they're saying this technology is going to change education. It's scary. We need to stop students from using it. They're going to be able to cheat quicker. So it's very, very much in line to what we're hearing now with
True.
generative AI. And students are starting to use generative AI in their day-to-day lives. Snapchat has an AI you could speak to, and it's becoming more and more frequent for them to use it. So as educators, we need to hop on board.
Hey, I think, hey, we're pumping this episode out for everyone to hear, Ellis. I hope that they listen. But this is actually ties nicely into what you just said. Let's look ahead. We just look back. Let's look ahead. What do you see as some of the most exciting possibilities? And I know this is a tough question, and challenges for that integration and intersection of AI at higher learning. And I know that's a pretty open-ended question, but maybe let's start with some of the exciting possibilities. Weave in the challenges if you'd like, but I know that's a tough one.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see higher level learning. So as with when the internet launched, we got higher level research.
Mm.
I think we're going to see a new evolution of this. I think when the TI-89 calculator, or whatever that calculator was called,
Yep.
that changed math.
Right.
This is going to change English. This is going to change research. This is going to change how we retrieve data.
Mm.
So I think as this keeps advancing, you're going to see more content being generated by AI. You're going to see more images being generated by AI. You're going to start seeing AI generation in films. One example that pops to mind is the Disney Plus series Secret Invasion, with
Right. Yes.
they used AI to generate the whole entrance sequence for that.
Wow.
And
Cool.
it's incredible.
Yeah.
We're going to start seeing that for major cost savers in companies, in higher education, and it's going to become a staple of our lives. I think students are going to use it for research. They're going to use it for writing. And I think as educators, we need to promote and make sure students are using it the correct way. Because
Agreed.
if we teach them how to use it correctly, we're going to have less of them using it to write essays for us. And if we have such a massive concern about students using it to write essays, then we need to do a higher level thinking on what our assignments are. Do we send students home to have ChatGPT to write an essay, and then we bring them back to the classroom and say, make this better, improve it, add additional research? How can you make this document more successful? So we're advancing their writing beyond what even AI can do. So it's just so exciting to think about all the possibilities that can happen because of this new technology.
I love that the way you're looking at it. I think there needs to be more of a positive spin right now. I feel like you said, the noise around the negative aspects is perhaps the most loud. Thank you so much for shining this positive light on the side of AI in higher education. That's Ellis Reeves, Director of Online Learning and Support at the University of South Carolina Aiken. I hope, Ellis, the conversation today has led you to want to come back on, because we'd love to have you back.
Oh, absolutely. And I hope if I can get just one person to play around with AI and experience it positively, then we did something good today.
I agree. And make sure you check out the DigitalEDU Dialogues podcast on YouTube and across all platforms you find your favorite podcasts. We are available and for free. Thank you for joining us for episode number 3. We will be back for episode 4 right around the corner. DigitalEDU Dialogues, part of the Educity family of companies.